Welcome to the Hollywood Video Podcast. I'm your host, David Wells, and we're going to talk about movies, or at least try to. It's just a little bit before I have to go to church, so this will probably be a short one, if only by necessity, but we'll make it work. So, who or what are we talking about today? I guess we'll be talking about the career of Kevin Smith. It's interesting. What'll make this set apart from me talking about another filmmaker or any other filmmaker is I've hardly seen any of his movies as of, let's see, I've not seen that many of his movies. I think I saw, first one I was consciously aware was seeing Cop Out in theaters, which is, I'm sure that would amuse him to no end. Been aware of them, and like my earliest familiarity with him was him from back in the day when he was that kind of snarky, bearded, like fat guy that talked about stuff. So, yeah. But when I got into filmmaking, he was one of those guys that you heard about at some point, because when I got into filmmaking, his movie Clerks it was about 10 or 12-ish years old, and so people were still talking about it, and that baffles me a little bit. The idea that his filmmaking career is not that much older than for how long I've attempted to make movies. And there's a big chunk of time where I just haven't made anything. But I've made short videos for church and stuff. So if not for that, I might have checked out a long time ago. But it's interesting that my own filmmaking has not been influenced by the movies I've seen him make. Like, not by any stretch, but because, you get into filmmaking, you hear about him. Is one of those pieces of information. I think the thing I've heard him say that actually stuck with me was, make something that you're absolutely excited about that no one else is making. And I'm like, that makes sense. Or make the movie that you want to see that no one else is making. And I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. And I've also heard him say, good enough is his mantra. Like, okay, that's good enough. Like, he doesn't strive for perfection. It almost sounds lazy, him saying that, but I feel like Clint Eastwood has said something similar. Where he's like, Clint Eastwood famously doesn't do a lot of takes. One or two, and then he moves on. Now, Clint Eastwood makes it sound a lot less lazy by saying, like, he makes sure to get great people in every facet of the filmmaking process, from the actors, the editors, the grips. That way they can just slide into things. And I'm like, okay, that works. But anyway, while I can't say that Kevin Smith's work has been an influence on my work, I do listen to him talk about making movies all the time. And even that isn't necessarily an influence per se, but I I remember that I started to make movies around the time that Kevin Smith sort of started to change as a filmmaker. What's really interesting is if you watch his career, there's an evolution. And I gotta feel like him hanging around Stan Lee had something to do with it. I feel like even so if I remember correctly, and I'm looking this up on Wikipedia as we do the podcast. Let's see. Kevin Smith. Oh wow, Clerks came out in 1994. See, that's the weird thing. There's like, wow. I started to want to make movies in 2003, so he was still relatively fresh in filmmaking, which is just baffling. Around, let's see, the two movies that were, dang, I think he had, I decided I wanted to make movies in about 2003. I didn't get a chance to shoot a movie until 2004, and I had to wait to edit a movie until 2006. So the beginning of my filmmaking takes place between Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back and Clerks 2, which I've I've seen bits and pieces of both, but yeah, as I made movies, you know, listen to him talk about movies as the internet and media got bigger and bigger. One of those background noises to have. I think I actually bought a DVD copy of Clerks and watched it just because you hear like, oh, a single location, made a movie with friends he knew, financed it himself. I mean, I'd heard something similar about El Mariachi, but, and Robert Rodriguez is, I could say that was an influence, or his career, or although I would say I don't try to make the same kind of movies, just, oh, it was a figure that hyped me up to be like, oh, you can do this. And Kevin Smith just happened to talk a lot by his own admission. So what's interesting is he has said himself that had he been born a second later than he was, he probably would have started a podcast and never gotten into filmmaking, which, I mean, it is much easier to just sit yourself down, start talking, and then upload it. There's less factors, less variables to have to deal with. And it does amaze me what with the rise of short form content online, how anybody born after the 90s decides, oh, I want to make movies. Which makes me low-key in a way take them more seriously. Because it's like, if they're swimming against the current, then they must really be in it. Or they figure it's something cool to do. But yeah, most of his movies, if I have seen them, I've seen them for research purposes. Like, I just watched Clerks, and I didn't even find it particularly entertaining. It was just like research, like, okay, a single location, making a movie with just your friends. What could you reasonably expect from the results? And you find out, oh, we made it for $20,000 and just paid credit card upon credit card and was like, I'm going to be in debt for the rest of my life. But at least I'll have this movie to remind myself how stupid I was to think of trying. And by the grace of God, his movie was successful, picked up, and he had a career based off of that. By his own admission, he'd say he's no Christopher Nolan, and he probably wouldn't put himself on too high of a pedestal, but I figure if I had a career like his, if I don't get to be the next Christopher Nolan, it wouldn't be a terrible thing to be a Kevin Smith. But anyway, I think the earliest I was familiar with him was seeing him. Well, I heard about Jay and Silent Bob in the early 2000s. But I think the earliest I remember hearing about Kevin Smith was he did this interview with Stan Lee, and me and my brothers, we were watching it, and we're just noticing how he keeps going, uh-huh, yeah, right. Throughout the interview, I'm like, what's this guy's deal? And then years later, Kevin is, I say it like I know him, Kevin is like talking about the interview, and he comes to the same assessment that how he conducted himself in that interview was just ridiculous. And I think my filmmaking journey and my comic making journey, because, and to a degree, animation, they all kind of overlapped. I'd been drawing comics for a couple years, and I realized I'd wanted to try my hand at animating, but I realized I'm never going to command the attention to detail that I want, so put that aside. And I focused on filmmaking. I pretty much gave up on drawing in 2005. But yeah, so the only reason I ever really watched Kevin Smith movies was it was research. You see, okay, this is what it looks like when you have this budget, these resources. And I remember hearing like, okay, Clerks was the 20K low budget movie. Then he makes Mallrats, which was a significant boost. First time he had to work with a studio and union rules and all of that red tape. So it's that classic sophomore flop. I mean, it's successful in its own right, but it wasn't the screaming success that he had hoped for, and he thought maybe his career was over before it started. But it sort of ingrained that thing of he likes making movies with his friends, which that's not a problem. Adam Sandler's made a whole career of that. But he realizes he needs to make the next one more successful, or he just wants another shot at making movies. So this is a comeback story where he makes Chasing Amy, and it's for a significantly reduced budget. It's like, I think, a 200K-ish picture, maybe 257,000. So not nearly as much resources as he had to work with on Mallrats, but a major step up from Clerks. And that was a small enough budget that they could be left alone, but big enough that they weren't on edge all the time. And that one helped him maintain a professional career. And the next movie he did was Dogma, which courted controversy for, if you know anything about the movie, at the time he was still a religious person, and he was just trying to work out his own faith, and that was his attempt. And a lot of people didn't like the movie. They do some pretty offensive stuff in it, so I could understand why. But what I don't understand is that people got violent. He got death threats for a couple years, had to have his mail checked for security reasons. And when he went to a film premiere, he wanted to bring up his kid with him, and they said, anybody can get a ticket to this movie. And he's like, yeah, I know. And they said, no, anybody can get a ticket to this movie. And if you went up there with your kid, I would feel guilt-ridden if something happened and I hadn't at least warned you. I think he wound up taking his kid with him just because he had this idea of like, if I don't, then the terrorists win. And by terrorists, he means people who would resort to violence for the fact that they didn't like something he made. And I gotta wonder if that, just based on the attention that got him, I don't know. So the 2000s were an interesting time for Kevin Smith. He did a Clerks animated series, which, I don't know, it was one of those things that I might have still been in that mindset of as a kid of like, oh, a cartoon, I'll watch it. And so I checked it out a couple times, and it was, because it was made for network television, they cleaned it up a bit and they had to go do different things. So I guess they had to rely on like sort of more surrealist humor. And what else did he do? I'm kind of researching this video as I record it as well. So I think he did a couple of TV shows. He did TV shows and movies. He would kind of just throw something at the wall and see what sticks. So after Dogma, he does Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, and then he does Clerks 2. And people sort of ran him through the ringer of, oh, he's just going back to a safe spot because, like, oh, there's a built-in audience, so they'll go see it. But it worked out well for him. It was between that and movie and a Green Hornet movie he was set to direct. But after making the movie Jersey Girl, which I skipped over, I think that was his most expensive movie at that point. Let's see. Oh yeah, wow. That was a budget of $35 million. And it just made $37 million. Yikes. I think that's like the budget of every movie he's made since put together. Like all the movies he's made pre-Jersey Girl and all the movies he's made post-Jersey Girl. If you take all of that money and put it together, it still doesn't equate the budget of Jersey Girl, which is, yeah, that's wild. But anyway, yeah. So he realized that with big money comes big expectations and big involvement from studios. And he didn't want to do that. So Clerks 2, that offered the opportunity to have his say and work within a comfortable set of restraints on resources. Worked out for him. And this was kind of his peak studio involvement. So from like 1994 to 2008, he could reliably go to studios and pitch stuff. But, you know, something happened, and that movie was called Zack and Miri. I'm censoring the title. I don't know what the algorithm or whatever will do to, I don't know, Spotify and YouTube. They're weird about certain words, so I'll just call it Zack and Mary. So anyway, the premise of that movie is two roommates slash friends are low on rent, and they realize they can cover their rent if they shoot certain kinds of films, which are not all age appropriate. I'll just say that. And so this was kind of the last time he made a movie with studio money. And the movie was hated. He said, "Oh my gosh, I've destroyed Seth Rogen's career." And it's kind of a mixed bag of how some people believe that he didn't take the criticism well, and others are like, oh, he's allowed to feel whatever he wants. Like, I mean, that's true, but I forget exactly, but apparently he made critics have to pay for a ticket to see his movie, which is, I think, sounds reasonable. But then there's also the argument of like, okay, you let critics see a movie for free, and then they spread the word on your movie, which that sounds fair. But then he had this epiphany of like, well, I'm not making movies that critics are going to like. People say his movies are self-indulgent, and it's like, I suppose so. His primary goal seems to just be about entertaining himself, which there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, but at the same time, it's like, you got to take the criticism along with the praise. And I guess he doesn't want to put his movie up for scrutiny in front of people that he knows are more than likely not going to enjoy it, and he knows the type of movie he wants to make. So I don't know, make of it what you will. So he kind of had this like crisis of faith moment regarding filmmaking. And at this point, he had also delved into podcasting. In fact, he was one of the early adopters of the format. And at that time, people thought, oh, radio and talking is dead. Fast forward a couple years later, that seems like a short-sighted comment to make. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, then you know how wrong they were. So anyway, he does podcasting, and he gets this idea to make a movie that is loosely based on the Westboro Baptist Church, and it's a horror film, and he's never really done a horror film. They've all been like sort of quasi-comedies. He's tried to get a laugh out of people. This is the first time where it seems like he didn't do that. Again, he was still a person of faith at the time, and I guess in a way, like, he tried to work through that on Dogma, and this was again him trying to reconcile his faith to stuff he saw going on around him. So he makes this movie, but he does it differently. He doesn't get a theatrical... I was wrong. I skipped a movie. I thought Zack and Miri was the last time he did a studio movie. And then he makes Red State, but I totally left Cop out, and he probably wouldn't be too disappointed with me with leaving that out. But I'm going to go ahead and go backwards. So he makes Cop Out in 2009, and it's like, it's an outlier because it's the first time that he directed a movie that he didn't really write. There are a couple of little Kevin Smith flares that show out. But if you watch this movie and the rest of them, you'll know it's an outlier. Perhaps even more so than Red State. I remember I saw this movie. This might have actually been the first of his movies I saw in the theater. Might still be the only one. But anyway, I remember seeing this, and there's this interrogation scene, and the one good laugh I got from this movie was where Tracy Morgan says, "The Forbidden Zone was once a paradise," and I got that reference movie. So, in this movie, Kevin Smith had done a cameo in one of the Die Hard movies. Him and Bruce Willis seemed to get along, and so when this movie comes along, they decide to work together. And from what Kevin Smith has said, the making of the movie with Bruce Willis turned out to be a bit more confrontational. Now, post Bruce Willis's retirement from acting, where his health has steadily declined, Kevin Smith has kind of walked back all the negativity he's expressed about the making of the film. So, he's free to do whatever he wants. Yeah, but this really was sort of the final time that he made a movie with studio involvement. So that movie had a budget of $30 million. Gosh, as I'm going, I really should have done research on this. But I wanted to make something quick and simple before I had to leave. It seems that Jersey Girl, Zack and Mary, and Cop Out are the biggest budgets that he's had to work with. Jersey Girl he made for $35 million. Zack and Mary, he actually got $24 million, which at the time that was sort of the mid-range budget, the middle-class film budget for films. I think Pineapple Express had a similar budget. Cop Out had a budget of $30 million, and I think that was the last time he had that kind of money. So anyway, he got to work with Bruce Willis. He also got to work with Harold Faltermeyer, who was the composer for a lot of 80s movies, most notably Top Gun. So, I think that if you've watched Kevin Smith's career, you know, take two. If you've watched Kevin Smith's career, you'll see there was a change. He used to be way more emo, way more sullen, and then all of a sudden he got super jolly and enthusiastic. He's like, "Hey kids, what's up? It's Kevin Smith." And he's like, "Hey kids, what's up? It's Kevin Smith." It's like he hung around Stan Lee enough that he got that jovial. I think something that might have also had to do with that is he's talked about his own dad passing away, how they had one last good hang with him, or like his whole family had dinner, and then he got a call saying like, "Hey, you got to come over, Dad's not doing well." So anyway, he heard that his dad died screaming, and that must have left a mark on him. And he said before that like he used to talk about movies that he hated all the time. He used to rip on them. And he says now, "You'll never hear me talk about a movie I don't like, because what's the point? Life's too short." Yeah, so I mean that's admirable. Anyway, so there's kind of this. So yeah, he went from emo to jolly, and I attribute a lot of that to Stan Lee's influence. I mean, he got to meet and work with one of his heroes really on in his filmmaking career. When he wrote Mallrats, there was a scene where a Stan Lee type character comes and gives him a prep talk, and one of his producers said, "Oh, I know Stan Lee. Why don't you just ask him to be in it?" And he was like, "Hollywood is good." And he was able to meet him, and one of the things that really left an impact on him was towards the end of Stan Lee's life, I forget if it was Stan Lee's wife, one of his associates said to Kevin Smith, he thinks of you as a son. And I think every time Kevin tells that story, he gets teary-eyed. There was one thing that I sort of took from Kevin Smith is the permission to cry and get emotional about stuff, about works of art that mean something to you. So that's why anytime I've met a Power Ranger at a convention, I can guarantee it's going to be a Waterworks show. I can't not get emotional telling them what an influence it's had on me. So, going back to Red State, it is the first movie that was financed through unconventional means. So, I think, let's see, what did he do? So apparently he auctioned the film and bought it himself for $20 or something. And he did a traveling road show. Basically, he would go around to movie theaters with people, and he knew that he had a big enough fan base that people would come and see it just for the novelty of seeing him in real life. And it went directly to DVD and video on demand. I will say that was probably the easiest time for him to be able to do that, because I bet DVDs helped make that feasible. Today, I'm not so sure that would work. But anyway, this is kind of the genesis for Kevin Smith's current state. The next movie he made was Tusk, which was based off of a tweet he read that some guy said, "You can live in my place rent-free. All you have to do is dress up as a walrus for 2 days." They sort of took that, and they found out later on that it wasn't true, that it was just a gag. But they took that and they made this David Cronenberg-esque body horror film. It's perhaps the most Cronenberg thing in a while. And he's since made Yoga Hosers, which takes place in the same universe. And then Jay and Silent Bob was the last pre-pandemic movie he made. And then post-pandemic, he made a movie called Kilroy Was Here, which I think is an NFT movie. And then he did Clerks 3. They shot that movie, I think, in 25 days, which is amazing. And he said he was able to do that because he had all that years of experience, which, yeah, that helps out a lot. And then between that time and now, he bought the old theater that he used to go to as a kid, and he made a movie called The 4:30 Movie, which some people view as kind of a prequel to Clerks. I don't know how true it is. I don't even know if it takes place in the Buick universe, which the vast majority of his movies take place in the same universe. I think there are some noticeable exceptions, like Tusk being one, Red State another. Basic good rule of thumb is if Jay and Silent Bob don't show up, it's not there. But anyway, he makes this movie bases about his own movie going experience in high school. And he got his daughter's boyfriend to play the role of basically young him. And I watched it, and it has its moments, but I can say I've seen it. And it's another example of the movie largely takes place in one location. So you can view it as filmmaking education. Wasn't hugely entertaining, but there's this one great moment where he has this talk with the movie theater employee, and he has this epiphany that he's a filmmaker and that's what he's destined to do. And so I feel like most Kevin Smith movies, in my opinion, I watch them to learn about filmmaking. Not because they do anything particularly innovative, but it's just maybe a force of habit. You see what someone can do with resources, however limited they might be. And they do have those one or two moments. And as long as you can have those one or two moments, like, well, it's not a total failure. But it's funny, he started out as a young filmmaker, and I think he was in his early 20s when he started, and he started in his early 20s. He was born in 1970, so he's got about 17 years on me. Currently 54, and he's not that young guy anymore. But he keeps making movies. And anyway, he'll probably keep making movies until he dies. And who knows how many times him and Jason Mewes will keep playing Jay and Silent Bob. And even though one of the main characters from Clerks died, he talked about like, oh, I'll bring you back as a Force Ghost in Clerks 4. And it's like, yes. But anyway, I guess every Yahoo with any kind of camera can make a film or video or content of sorts nowadays. But that wasn't always the case. And Kevin Smith is kind of an example of that pre-time when the barrier to entry had come down significantly, but there were so many forces of friction that could dissuade you. And I guess one of the reasons he got a following and started to have any kind of influence was because he convinced people to not be afraid of the forces of friction, the barriers to entry. Like, I'm sure a lot of people did the work to push through that. So for that, we thank you. This has not been a remarkably deep podcast about his filmmaking. Maybe I'll do another one about him soon. But this has been the Hollywood Video Experiment. Whoops, I'm getting my other podcast mixed up. No, this has been the Hollywood Video Podcast. Go make a movie, go watch a movie, have a good time, and yes, have a good one. Bye.